Hello people, today we are going to tell a story from far Surimi about one of the two brothers, RENEKTON, the butcher of the sands. RENEKTON was born to fight. From a young age, it was obvious he had no fear, regularly brawling with much older children. It was usually his pride that led to these confrontations. RENEKTON was unable to back down or let any insult pass. While his older brother, Nasus, disapproved of his street fighting, RENEKTON relished it. Nasus eventually left to join the prestigious Collegium of the Sun, and RENEKTON's skirmishes became more serious. Fearing his brother's violent nature would see him imprisoned or in an early grave, Nasus helped him enlist in the Shuriman army. Officially, RENEKTON was too young, but Nasus made sure this was conveniently overlooked. The discipline of military life was a blessing. RENEKTON fought in numerous wars of conquest to expand the empire. His ferocity and toughness were still evident, but his honor and bravery became renowned. Nasus, now a celebrated general and tactician, would often say that he planned many great battles, but it was RENEKTON who won them. Indeed, after saving the isolated city of Zareta, RENEKTON was made a captain by the emperor himself and named gatekeeper of Shurima. Outnumbered 10-1, he and a small contingent had faced the enemy in the remote, rocky passes to the south to buy time for the city to be evacuated. It was a battle none had expected RENEKTON to survive, let alone win. Yet he held out long enough for a relief force led by Nasus to arrive, and the invading forces were routed. Through decades of service, RENEKTON's reputation came to rival even the god warriors of the ascended host. His presence on the battlefield an inspiration to those fighting alongside him and terrifying to his foes. Still, he was a grizzled and battle-scarred veteran of middling years when word reached him that his brother was close to death. He raced back to the capital to find Nasus, a pale shadow of his former self, having been struck down by a debilitating, wasting malady. The sickness was incurable. Nevertheless, the general's greatness was recognized by one and all. Beyond his military acumen, Nasus had curated the empire's great libraries and compiled or translated many of the finest literary works of antiquity. Such a man could not be allowed to pass, and it was decreed that he was worthy of ascension. The whole city gathered in witness, but Nasus no longer had the strength to climb onto the dais before the sun disk. Without thought for his own safety, RENEKTON lifted his brother in his arms and climbed the final steps, fully expecting to be obliterated in the process. He was just a warrior after all, and he knew Shurima would need Nasus in the years to come. However, RENEKTON was not destroyed. Beneath the blinding radiance of the sun disk, both brothers were raised up and remade, and when the light faded, two mighty god warriors stood before the crowds. Nasus in his lean, jackal-headed body, and RENEKTON as an immense reptile. The jackal was often regarded as the most clever and cunning of beasts, and the fearless aggression of the crocodile fit RENEKTON perfectly. RENEKTON had been a mighty hero before, but now he possessed power beyond mortal understanding. He led Shurima's armies to many bloody victories, neither giving nor expecting any mercy. His legend spread far beyond the borders of the empire, and it was his enemies that knew him as the Butcher of the Sands, a title he embraced. But there were some, Nasus among them, who came to believe that a portion of RENEKTON's humanity had been lost in his transformation. He seemed crueler, taking ever greater pleasure in the spilling of blood, and there were whispers of many battlefield atrocities. Nevertheless, he remained a staunch defender of Shurima, faithfully serving a succession of emperors, even through the rebellion of Icathia and the horrifying war that followed. Some years later, it was decided that the young Emperor Azir would join the ranks of the ascended host and become the immortal ruler his people deserved. The results were catastrophic. RENEKTON and Nasus were each more than a day's journey from the capital when it happened, and they arrived to find the glorious city in ruins. The sun disk was failing, drained of all its power. At the center of the carnage, they found the Emperor's treacherous magus, Zerath, now a malevolent being of pure energy. The brothers fought hard, but knowing that they could not destroy Zerath, Renekton finally wrestled him into the tomb of the Emperors beneath the city and bade his brother seal them inside. Knowing there was no other way, Nasus reluctantly did as his brother ordered. Zerath and Renekton continued their battle. For uncounted centuries they stalked one another through the lightless depths as the once great civilization of Shurima turned to dust in the world above. Zerath taunted his adversary, whispering poison in Renekton's ear, and gradually his viperous words began to take hold. He convinced Renekton that Nasus, jealous of his success, had leapt at the chance to be rid of him and enjoy immortality alone. Piece by piece, Renekton's sanity cracked. Zerath drove a wedge into these cracks, twisting his perception of what was real and what was imagined. When the tomb of the Emperors was finally opened by greedy mortal scavengers, Renekton roared his fury and thundered out into the desert, sniffing the air for his brother's scent. But Shurima has changed much in his absence. The ascended host is no more, leaving the people scattered and leaderless for the most part. Though he cares little for such things, Renekton has attracted followers among the most fierce and bloodthirsty of the desert raiders. Even if he cannot always tell friend from foe in his frequent deranged frenzies. And while there are moments when he resembles the proud, honorable hero of the past, most often Renekton is little more than a devolved, hate-maddened beast, driven on by the thirst for blood and vengeance. We now move on to the second part of the story. In this second cast is also his brother Nasus. Darkness renews. Am I a god? He no longer knows. Once, perhaps, when the sun disk gleamed like gold atop the great palace of 10,000 pillars. He remembers carrying a withered ancient in his arms, and them both borne into the sky by the sun's radiance. All his hurts and pain were washed away as the light remade him. If this memory is his, then was he once mortal? He thinks so, but cannot remember. His thoughts are a cloud of dune flies. Myriad shattered memories buzzing angrily in his elongated skull. What is real? What am I now? This place, this cave under the sands, is it real? He believes so, but he is no longer sure he can trust his senses. For as long as he can remember, he knew only darkness, awful, unending darkness that clung to him like a shroud. But then the darkness broke apart, and he was hurled back into the light. He remembers clawing his way through the sand, as the earth buckled and heaved, the living rock grinding as something long buried and all but forgotten heaved itself to the surface once again. Towering statues erupted from beneath the sand, vast and terrible in their aspect. Armored warriors with demonic heads loomed over him, ancient gods of a long-dead culture. Bellicose phantoms rose from the sand, and he fled their wrath. Escaping the rising city as light blazed and the moons and stars wheeled overhead. He remembers staggering through the desert, his mind afire with visions of blood and betrayal, of titanic palaces and golden temples brought down in the blink of an eye. Centuries of progress undone for the sake of one man's vanity and pride. Was it his? He does not know, but fears it might have been. The light that once remade his flesh now pains him. It burned him raw and seared his soul as he wandered the desert, lost and alone, tormented by a hatred he did not understand. He has taken refuge from its unforgiving light, but even here, squatting and weeping in this dripping cave, the Whisperer has found him. The shadow on the walls slithers around him, always muttering, always conspiring to feed his bitterness. He presses long, gnarled hands that end in vicious ebon talons to his temples, but he cannot shut his constant companion in the darkness out. He never could. The Whisperer tells tales of his shame and guilt. It speaks of the thousands who died because of him, who never had the chance to live thanks to his failure. A part of him believes these to be honeyed falsehoods, twisted fictions told often enough that he can no longer sift truth from lies. The whisperer reminds him of the light being shut away, showing him the jackal face of his betrayer looking down as he condemned him to the abyssal dark for all eternity. Tears gather at the corners of his cataracted eyes, and he angrily wipes them away. The whisperer knows every sacred path into his mind, twisting every certainty he once clung to, every virtue that made him the hero revered as a god throughout. Shurima. That name has meaning to him, but it fades like a shimmering mirage, remaining bound within the prison of his mind by chains of madness. His eyes, once so clear-sighted and piercing, are misted with the eons he spent in the endless dark. His skin was as tough as armored bronze, but is now dull and cracked, dust spilling from his many wounds like sand from an executioner's hourglass. Perhaps he is dying. He thinks he might be, but the thought does not trouble him overmuch. He has lived an age and suffered too long to fear extinction. Worse, he is no longer sure he can die. He looks at the weapon before him, a crescent-bladed axe without a handle. It belonged to a warrior king of Icathia, but a fleeting memory of breaking its haft as he had broken its bearer's army returns to him. He remembers remaking it, but not why. Perhaps he will use it to slice open his ridged throat and see what happens. Will blood or dust flow? No, he will not die here. Not yet. The whisperer tells him fate has another role for him. He has blood yet to spill, a thirst for vengeance yet to slake. The jackal face of the one who condemned him to darkness floats in his mind, and each time he sees it, the hatred carved on his heart boils to the surface. He looks up at the cave walls as the shadows part, revealing the crude daubings of mortals. Ancient, flaking images, so faded as to be almost invisible, depict the desert city in all its glory. Rivers of cold, clear water flow in its pillared thoroughfares, and the life-giving rays of the sun bring forth wondrous greenery from a newly fertile landscape. He sees a king in a hawk-headed helm atop a towering palace and a dark-robed figure at his side. Beneath them are two giants in armor wrought for war. One, a hulking, crocodilian beast armed with a crescent-bladed axe, the other a jackal-headed warrior scholar. In the reptilian form, he recognizes a mortal's awed representation of his ascended incarnation. He turns his gaze upon the remaining warrior. Time has all but erased the angular script beneath the faded image, but enough is still legible for him to make out his betrayer's name. Nasus, he says, brother, and with the source of his torment named, his own identity is heeds its voice. He clenches a clawed fist and touches the tip of his blade to the image of the jackal-headed warrior. You left me alone in the darkness, brother, he says. You will die for that betrayal. Thank you for listening to this story. You can give a like or subscribe or comment. And in the next episode, we will look at his brother, Nasus. Bye.